When I was younger, I used to do something I was absolutely not supposed to do. Stay up all night, watching movies. There was this TV channel, Metro TV. And every Saturday, from around 10 p.m. to sunrise, it was just movie after movie after movie. This was before streaming, long before YouTube. If you missed it, you missed it. So I would sit there, volume turned all the way down, so I wouldn't wake anyone up. Just enjoy myself. And on one of those nights, something happened that I've never really forgotten. I was deep into my third movie when suddenly I heard a sound. At first I thought it must be part of the movie. But then I heard it again. And this time, I knew it wasn't coming from the TV. It was coming from the dining room door, the one that led outside into our compound. So I got up slowly and started walking toward it. And as I got closer, the sound got clearer. When I reached the door, I saw it. A shadow. Right there at the handle. And it was moving. Instinctively, I screamed. And immediately, the shadow on the other side ran. I watched it dash across the compound and scale the wall in seconds. My dad woke up, shut everything down, and sent me straight to bed. But the next morning, we saw the door. The handle had been seriously tampered with. And it hit me. If I hadn't screamed, that person might have gotten in. And only God knows what would have ensued after that. Thank goodness it was just a petty thief who could be scared of by a teenage girl's scream. What if it had been someone far worse? Someone armed with something dangerous. You might think I'm being paranoid, but my fear was actually not unfounded. Because at that time, Accra wasn't just dealing with small-time burglars. Something much more serious was happening. People were being followed in broad daylight from banks, from busy streets, from places where one would ordinarily feel safe. And at the center of it all was one man. A man people swore wasn't even human. They called him the ghost of Raymond. A man whose early life was, by all accounts, unremarkable, until a single event transformed a working-class mechanic into the most wanted man in Ghana. This is the story of Raymond Ayee Ayeetey, famously, or rather infamously, known as Attah Ayi.
Several years of brutal and fatal operations in Accra and its environs, his reign has ended.
That's why we've been saying that armed robbery is a recidivist crime.
Now, before we get into how he became one of the most feared criminals in Ghana, it helps to understand something. Many of us believe some people are just bad. But is life really always that simple? There is this concept called social strain theory. And the basic idea is this. Society tells us what success looks like. Money, stability, prestige. And it also sets the right ways to get there. Education, hard work, legal jobs. But unfortunately, not everyone has equal access to those facts. So what happens when people want the outcome, but feel they don't have the means to get said outcomes? It creates pressure, frustration, what's called strain. And sometimes that strain pushes people towards unacceptable paths. Now, that doesn't excuse anything, but it helps explain how someone can start from a normal place and end up somewhere very different. Imagine this. You are a young girl. You got pulled out of school through no fault of your own, but because your parents couldn't afford it. By your late teens, you're on your own. No education, no real education, no safety net. You try to find work, but everything you qualify for, not only is it backbreaking, but it barely pays enough to survive. And then you look around and your peers, the ones that had the luxury of staying in school, they are doing well. They're living the life you were told you should want. And then someone offers you a shortcut. Not a good one, but an effective one. And that's what strain looks like. For some people, that pressure pushes them into choices they might never have made otherwise. Ayeetey grew up in Accra. It's reported his early life wasn't very stable, as at some point his mother traveled abroad, leaving him without much guidance and also causing him to drop out of school. He had only a basic level of education. So like most young people in similar situations, he learned a trade. He became a driver. And by most accounts, he was actually quite skilled. But at some point, things took a turn. Sorry. One account suggests that after crashing a car belonging to his master, he was left with the burden of paying for the repairs. And in that kind of system, that's not something you can easily walk away from. It becomes a debt you have to pay off, sometimes for years. Faced with that kind of pressure, he became desperate. This desperation made him a prime candidate for recruitment into crime. Somewhere along the line, he got introduced to a criminal network. Therein started his villain arc as Attah Ayi. At first, the crimes were relatively small. Things like car theft. But that didn't last though, because at some point, they got a gun. And that changed everything. In the early 2000s, Ghana's economy was still heavily cash-based. There was no mobile money, no banking apps. So when people withdrew money from the bank, they were physically carrying it. Attah Ayi's gang took advantage of this financial climate. They developed a system. What they did was they had spotters positioned in strategic locations, usually near busy banks. Their job was simple: watch and identify people withdrawing large sums of money. They would likely be carrying a briefcase or a leather bag, anything that looked worth their while. Once the target was identified, they would follow them carefully, patiently, blending into traffic. And when the moment was right, they would strike. In one reported incident, they followed a businessman across the city before blocking his car in traffic. They cut off every possible escape and robbed him. In another case, they trailed a pastor all the way from a bank to the entrance of his church. And even there, they didn't stop. And that really shocked people, because in Ghana, there are certain places people consider off limits. But Attah Ayi and his gang didn't seem to recognize any such boundaries. He and his people brazenly stormed the church premises and successfully snatched some of the money the pastor had withdrawn. As time went on, the robberies continued. And the fact that he kept escaping only added to the fear. At some point, the fear turned into something else. Myth. People started to believe that he wasn't just lucky, that he must be using some supernatural juju, that he could disappear into thin air, and that he could even scale walls effortlessly. He was somehow untouchable. And it went against the laws of nature. He became something larger than life. The ghost of Raymond, he called him. And the more the police failed to catch him, the more these stories grew. For the police, this was extremely frustrating. So they changed strategy. Instead of chasing a shadow, they made him visible. His face was circulated widely on billboards, in newspapers, on public spaces across the country. And suddenly, the ghost had a face. That changed things drastically for Attah Ayi. Because once people know what you look like, it becomes much, much harder to hide. So now, instead of moving freely, he was stuck, forced to watch and wait, seeing his own face staring back at him from every corner. And slowly, that pressure started closing in. At this point, Attah Ayi was one of the most wanted men in Ghana. So naturally, you would expect his arrest to be dramatic. Perhaps a high-speed chase with a shootout. Chaos all over. Something straight out of a movie. But that's not how real world works most of the time. It's not what happened at all. In February of 2005, he was arrested. It wasn't during a robbery. There was no car chase. But rather, it was in a quiet, everyday setting. Attah Ayi had been hiding in his sister's apartment, living quietly, trying not to be seen. But with all the pressure on him, the pressure that forced him to hide, he became quite irritable. And that's what led to him being in an altercation with a fellow tenant. This drew attention to him, and the people around recognized his face. It was the same face they had been seeing plastered everywhere. The police were called, and it was over. No resistance, no vanishing act. Just a man who had terrorized the city for years, and he was finally in custody. Attah Ayi was later tried and sentenced to multiple prison terms totaling over a century. Some accounts say it was even up to 160 years.
Finally, when was the last time you heard of Attah Ayi, the once notorious armed robber? Well, he is serving his term at the Accra prisons, the man who became popular because the police said he was the most dreaded criminal around, is serving 120 years for various crimes he was convicted for.
He claimed that his confession had been forced out of him after he had been tortured, and that not all the crimes attributed to him were actually his.
So, you started with car boots.
Yeah.
Then what next?
Okay, doing the car boot. Sometimes when you go to, okay, I can say town or something like that. When you got gun or something, we normally go and throw it where radio stations, we just throw it because we are afraid of the gun. But later, one of our guys came and said we should use the gun. So then we started using the gun, and we know we take it to robbing, and then we have turned it to robbing.
Were you good? You good with handling the gun?
Okay, not that bad. By then I was a driver.
Okay.
I was a driver.
So how did you go from driver to champion, captain?
Okay, sometimes I might say that what sometimes Ghanaians are saying is not true, because I'm not a champion. And there are many crimes that they have given to me that I don't know anything about it. Yeah. But all the same, I've offended. So I just have to be quiet and then pray for God that God will deliver me from this place. Yeah.
So tell me about the first time you shot someone.
No, I haven't done that before.
You've never shot anyone?
At all.
So all these operations, you know, your crew, you follow somebody from the bank, and then you stop them somewhere, you take their money. You were carrying a gun during this operation?
Okay, by the first time we were not carrying a gun, but later we started using the gun,
But you never shot?
At all, never. At all.
But those claims did not change the outcome of the case. Years later, another development brought renewed attention to his case. A mechanic named Yao Asante Ejekum, who had been tried and convicted because he had worked on some of Attah Ayi's gang's vehicles, had now been exonerated and released after spending over 2 decades in prison. The court ruled that simply working with individuals involved in crime did not automatically make one an accomplice. That decision led to questions from the public. Were there others who had been wrongly convicted? Were some cases handled under pressure? Were the police in a hurry to get an Ayi to pin all the robberies at the time on? And then there's Attah Ayi himself. In prison, he's reported to have undergone a transformation. He is said to have embraced Christianity and is now playing a pastoral role among inmates. He speaks of regret, of transformation, while at the same time asking for a pardon, or wanting a second chance. So now the question becomes, do we believe him? Can someone who once followed people in broad daylight, terrorized a city, and even carried out robberies in places most consider sacred, truly change? Or is this just another strategy? I don't have the answers, I don't know. But I do know this. For the people who experienced those robberies, for the victims, the fear and loss from that time didn't just disappear. Some stories end when the person is caught. But this one still leaves plenty of questions behind.